Hello, everyone. This is part one of session 21 of Pre-Socratics to Augustine, also called History of Philosophy 1. We are now transitioning to Hellenistic philosophy. And what is Hellenistic philosophy? Well, the simplest way to think about it is just that it is that era of Greek philosophy which comes after so-called classical philosophy. And the main representatives of classical Greek philosophy are Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Now, before we talk in any more detail about the Hellenistic philosophers, I want us to think a little bit about the transition, and that involves thinking more about some pre-Socratic philosophy, early Greek philosophy, and also thinking more about Aristotle. The first Hellenistic philosopher whose work and whose ideas we are going to discuss is Epicurus. Epicurus is famous for two sets of ideas. One is that he argues that pleasure is the good, and that view is called hedonism. And a lot of people in the history of philosophy think that hedonism is fundamentally flawed. Now, we are not going to discuss that dimension of Epicurus' philosophy. Instead, because we want to see the threads and the strands of thought that start in early Greek thought and how they develop throughout Greek philosophy, we will focus on his physics. He is developing further early Greek atomism. And in order for us to assess how successful he is at developing it further and fine-tuning it and making it more sophisticated, we first need to think again about early Greek atomism and then think about Aristotle's objections against it. So then our goal is going to be to look at Epicurus' atomism and ask ourselves whether Epicurus is able to offer a sophisticated version of atomism which takes care of concerns which Aristotle raises. Now, here are the three objections that are most prominent among Aristotle's many objections against early Greek atomism. One, that the atomists only posit material causes. Now, we talked about Aristotle's four kinds of causes and that he thinks that really everything, even material entities like a stone, even if you want to give an account of a stone, you will need to talk about the four kinds of causes because you will need to talk about what makes it a stone and so on and so forth. So you're never talking only about material constituents if you are moving within the Aristotelian system. And Aristotle thinks that atomism is among those approaches that are fundamentally flawed because the only kind of cause or principle, as he puts this, that they discuss is material. The second objection, and it may sound as if that was kind of the same objection, but it really isn't. The second objection is that the atomists only talk about material entities. Now, you might think that is kind of the same. Really, what he's saying is all they talk about is matter. But the two objections get at different dimensions of what he thinks is wrong with atomism. One claim is, as we already said, that they only talk about material causes. But you could talk only about material causes and then try to argue that immaterial things somehow emerge from these material things. So you could talk only about material causes, but ultimately talk about material and immaterial entities. And Aristotle's claim is that the atomists not just only talk about material causes, they also only talk about material entities, as if everything in the world was just material things. The third objection that Aristotle raises is that the atomists cannot explain change or movement. Why is that? Since he thinks that both atoms and void, the kind of emptiness that the atomists think the atoms move through, because Aristotle thinks that both of that are material causes, he thinks of both atoms and void as if they were material constituents of the world. And hence, there's kind of nothing left in the atomist system that can play the role of what Aristotle calls the efficient cause, the cause that is the source of movement. So those are three objections. And we will talk next time, and also after that, more about, how strong are these objections? What are the resources of a more sophisticated atomism as Epicurus develops it? For now, I want to give you an assignment that is a little bit different from other assignments we've had, because I want you to entertain a thought experiment. The early Greek atomists, the two most important figures here are Leucippus and Democritus. We already mentioned them earlier in the semester. And Democritus apparently wrote a lot of treatises. He was a prolific writer. Aristotle, of course, also wrote a lot of things. Aristotle even wrote a treatise about Democritus, which shows how strongly he engages with Democritus and how much he considers him a kind of competitor even in natural philosophy. Aristotle would not come up with all these objections against atomism if he didn't take it seriously as a contender. So what happened, however, is that Democritus's work is entirely lost, whereas Aristotle's work survives. And we only have these snippets about Democritus's views. We also have some snippets of the treatise that Aristotle wrote about Democritus, but we don't have longer bits of text that really convey Democritus's thought. Now, the thought experiment that I want you to entertain is, suppose Democritus's work had survived. It is, in so many ways, deeply different from the Western tradition. Assuming that Aristotle is at least somewhat along the right lines, it is a kind of materialism that does not talk about immaterial entities. Suppose it had survived, and suppose it had been influential. Do you think that the world had gone differently for us?